Hello and welcome to episode 42 of the Comfort via Discomfort podcast. I'm your host, Adam Beaumier, and I am extremely excited and grateful to bring you this episode with Jacqueline Bezaire. Jacqueline and I met in our professional lives, and as soon as I learned about her story, I knew that I had to get her on the podcast to share her story with you and with the rest of the world. For those of you watching on YouTube, as you can see, to my left or to your right, you can see that Jacqueline was born without fingers on her right hand. Now, she refers to this as her little hand, and when she describes this to others, she says that she has an upper limb difference. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of the language that she uses or that specific term because Jacqueline does that in the episode. She talks about the language that she uses, what that term and others mean to her, and how other terms can be interpreted differently by people like her. I had such an incredible time learning about Jacqueline's perspective and about her story. It's a story that is going to honestly tug at a lot of different emotions. It's going to make you feel sad and empathetic. It's going to make you feel inspired and happy and like fired up as well. And that's because Jacqueline really takes us through what her mindset has been like through her life. And there's really kind of two different mindsets. The first mindset was when she was growing up. She never had any conversations with anybody, including her parents, about her upper limb difference. And that caused her to be ashamed of that part of who she was. And she literally hid her hand, her right hand, from her friends and her family. There were friends that knew her for an entire year before they knew that she had an upper limb difference, which is fascinating that she did such a good job of hiding it. But yeah, and she also had a really interesting experience with a pilot when she was 18 years old that she will never, ever forget. And then the second mindset is the one that she's adopted over the last X number of years, where she has started to lean into the discomfort of the difference that she has. She's really started to embrace the fact that she has an upper limb difference and that it's only part of her. It's not all of her. It's not her entire identity. It's just part of her and part of her story. And this mindset shift has really allowed her to step into who she is as a person and to share her story with others, which is extremely motivating and inspiring. There's a sense of hope in her story as well, because she talks about how there was an employee resource group at work that was formed called the Diverse Abilities Network. And essentially, what this was, it was a safe space for Jacqueline and others like her and allies to people like her to get together and actually talk about their experiences and their stories and their perspective and their struggles and so on. And I just want to do that for other people. Like that's part of the reason of having Jacqueline on this show is to show you that it is absolutely 100% possible to create safe spaces for each other, to not only survive, but to thrive. And so Jacqueline takes you through those two mindsets. She also takes you through two extremely important experiences in her life. One being when she met a little girl named Elise that was like 3 or 4 at the time that had or still has an upper limb difference. And Jacqueline talks about how meeting Elise changed how she wanted to show up as a parent, right? Remember, in her childhood, Jacqueline didn't talk to anybody, including her own parents, about her upper limb difference. So Jacqueline's perspective completely changed, and she wanted to make sure that her son and any other children that she had would grow up in this world knowing that it's okay to be different. And if others have differences, that we can still accept them and for who they are, and love them for who they are, and respect them for who they are, and create spaces for them to share their experiences and for us to support them. So I'm getting fired up just going through this introduction because it's such an interesting story, and Jacqueline is such an incredible person, and I give her, like, I have so much respect for her for standing up and speaking up and sharing her story. She's even a model now for an agency called Kello Inclusive. There's a link in the description below if you want to click on that. They literally only feature people with diverse abilities, and it is incredible, and I think we need more of it. So in this episode, Jacqueline also mentions that she's trying to land some jobs as a model with some brands. So if anybody knows any brands out there that is like looking for people with diverse abilities to support, please let me know. Reach out to me. My link is in the description. Jacqueline's link is in the description. And of course, any resources that Jacqueline mentioned are also there. So please check them out. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or family member. If it changes your perspective, it might just change somebody else's perspective. And this is how we learn together, by sharing our knowledge so that we can become better people and become better people for the people that we love the most. So hit that share button, send it to somebody else. And of course, if you really did enjoy this, let us know what you think by reaching out to either one of us. And please consider leaving a review on whatever platform you're listening on, because it would go a long way to support the channel. Thank you and enjoy. All right, welcome back to the CVD Podcast, where we are creating a mentally healthier world, one open, honest, and vulnerable conversation at a time. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Jacqueline Bezaire. Jacqueline, I am so excited to get into your story today.
Hi, Adam. I am just so happy to be talking to you today.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. We had some technical difficulties that prevented us from recording this at an earlier date, but hey, everything happens for a reason. So we're meant to have this conversation right now. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting into your story. But before we jump into things, why don't you tell me a little bit about who you are, and tell the listeners a little bit about who you are as a person and what you do for work, and then we'll go from
Sure
there.
thing. So, as Adam introduced me, my name is Jacqueline Bezaire. My pronouns are she and her. An important piece that I identify with is that I was born with no fingers on my right hand, and I call it my little hand. I am a mom to two kids, so my 5 year old and almost 3 year old take up a lot of my energy and time day to day. And I also have a Wheaton Terrier who I love to pieces, and I walk him every day. That's an important piece of my kind of well being. My husband's on this journey with me, and I've had some people describe me as a rolling stone that gathers no moss. So, at times I take risks or lean into uncomfortable areas, and I'm really just trying to live life in alignment with my values at work and at home,
Mm.
and that takes consciousness every day. um, and then from a work perspective, I've recently kind of shifted fields. I am an HR professional, and after doing HR for 10 years, I've decided to join a legal services team. So excited to kind of try this new role and still use, a lot of the transferable skills that I've gathered over the last decade in HR. So that's
Yeah, absolutely. And before we hit record, you were saying that you've literally been in the new role for like 5 days. And there's been a lot of discomfort with those first 5 days. Tell me a little bit about what's been going
uh,
through your head and your
and
heart.
another layer on top of this is, believe it or not, my husband also started a new job on the same day with a new
Wow.
company. So both of us are navigating this change. And, Adam, I think you would concur that I'm a very thoughtful, reflective person. So making a job change didn't come lightly, it had intention behind it. And despite everything my brain was saying that this is the right thing to do, last week was a testament to how your emotions just bubble up and change a little bit of that, confidence that we have in our mind. And, day one, I was really excited, but also couldn't wait for that first day to be done. And then day two, three, I was like overwhelmed with information. Am I the right person for this? But come day five, I was able to catch up, have some great conversations with people, and just kind of get back to that grounded optimism about the change. So that's a little bit of the roller coaster.
Yeah. How did so when you were feeling when you're experiencing like self-doubt and all of these questions on day 2 or 3, how did you navigate that? What were some of the, like, how did you get through that? How did you push forward to day 4 and to day 5?
I'd say, one of them is just to catch myself, right? When we go down those
Mm,
rabbit holes, I'm trying to practice that skill set, that we aren't always our thoughts, and
mm,
what we're thinking isn't always the truth. So just making sure that I didn't go down those holes. But another tool is just talking with trusted people. I was able to talk
mm,
with some trusted friends and coworkers and just share with others who've gone through similar changes. And I think vocalizing it is a really important piece of navigating that uncomfortable territory.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just in the couple minutes that you've already been talking, you said so many important things. And one of them, you said being conscious, leaning into the discomfort and being able to sort of push through those things takes consciousness. And when you find trusted people in your life and you're able to talk with them, does that help you to become more conscious of like what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're experiencing?
I'd say yes and no, right? Talking with others is a chance to practice where our consciousness is, but it's also
Hmm.
so easy to get caught up in the moment with that other person and
Hmm.
um, all these social constructs we have or patterns. So I'd say, I try to bring that consciousness into dialogue with others, but it's still a work in progress for sure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And another thing that you mentioned in the introduction there was that you are a person that kind of take some risks and you lean into the discomfort. But I know from our conversation before that your life hasn't always been that way. And a big part of our conversation today is going to be about your limb difference, the fact that you were born with no fingers on your right hand. And I know that was something that was almost avoided for a long time, where you didn't talk about it with like your parents, you didn't talk about it with your friends, you kind of avoided it. You want to take me through a little bit about what it was like in your childhood growing up with a limb difference?
Yeah. So, I mean, I grew up in Edmonton, Alberta. I was the middle of two boys, so I have two brothers in a fairly traditional, middle class family. Uh, but I don't remember talking about my little hand with anyone. And no one initiated conversations with me. My parents didn't really talk to me about it, teachers didn't talk to me about it. And then consequently, I never really talked about it with others or even like reflected on
Hmm.
it myself. So that's, one way I avoided um, the reality of living with a limb difference. Yeah, and I also like, I think, you and I have talked, I did a really good job of hiding my hand. Um,
Hmm.
so I would wear all sorts of clothes with pockets. Pockets, hoodies were great, right? Because when you're going to school, a hoodie is just a super comfortable piece of clothing. I could always just tuck my hand in there. I would sit on it. So when I was taking the bus to school, I'd always have like my right hand underneath my leg so strangers didn't see
Hmm.
it. Um, yeah, just avoided shaking hands and things like that. And I mean, it worked. Like, I for sure had friends who had known me for months, if not almost a year, before they realized that I was clearly missing, yeah,
Wow.
some fingers.
Yeah, wow. And when you say that, when you told me that the first time, I was like, wow, that is, I mean, you obviously did a good job of hiding it, but it's also like it's incredible that it took them a year to find out, and it's also very like it's sad to hear that you were hiding like part of who you were, and felt like you almost had to do that. Do you remember how that would make you feel growing up, like as a teenager?
I think when we're teenagers, there's all sorts of emotions going on, and the hand for sure played into some of it, probably not all of it. um,
Hmm.
I just always had a feeling, like many others, that I was never good enough, right? I was never
Hmm.
the popular one or the most good looking one. And I think avoiding, my identity or a piece of my identity in the little hand prevented me from really connecting with myself and others. It probably built up
Mm.
some walls, uh, inside internally that, yeah, were those barriers to building true connections with others. Because it's when we're honest with others, right, in that space of trust, that you really build connection. So, kind of being
Hmm.
intentional with keeping a secret does the opposite.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You talk about connection, and that's such an important piece of our human experience. Like when you're young, when you're when you're old, it doesn't matter. Like connection is so important to who we are as people, and that sense of belonging should not be underestimated. And so you said that you couldn't necessarily be like almost honest and vulnerable with your limb difference with others, and you're kind of avoiding it yourself. And so you did you try everything you could to even like avoid conversation about it? Like if it did come up, like what happened if somebody was like, oh, did anybody ever ask about it, or how did those conversations kind of go?
You know, there were times when people asked about it. Um, I kind of had two lines that were my go-to lines, and it's really all that I knew. And one was, I was born like this. I didn't make a mistake. Which is interesting because if you think about that, it's
Mm,
like, why did I think other people assumed that it was an accident? And then the other
yeah.
one was that, so I was born in the 80s, and during the time there were certain medication or something that was being given to pregnant ladies, I think, to help with maybe just uncomfortable pregnancies, and it led to birth defects. And I would always tell people, like,
Okay.
no, my mom wasn't on anything. It wasn't her fault. There was nothing that she took or anything like that. I was just born like that, and they couldn't really
Mm,
explain it. Um, and those, yeah, like that's as deep as it went. And I think because of that, when somebody would ask, it would be quite, short, matter of fact, and then
right.
carry on. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like I was born like this and that was it. Or nope, my mom wasn't on drugs the whole time. Like that's it. Like that's end of, end of story, right? Kind of move on and try to avoid it as much as you can. Um, when was the first time that you had a conversation with your parents about it?
I can't remember.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I
Interesting.
remember little things they did in my childhood to accommodate my little
Okay.
hand. But yeah, no, I don't remember any like kind of quality dialogue around it. Yeah.
Yeah, which is really really interesting because it's almost like a missing piece of somebody teaching you how to navigate life with your limb difference. And maybe it was because they had no idea what that was like that they didn't start a conversation about it. Like what are your thoughts?
I think it's a few things. I think it comes down to just the communication that my family had, right? So my parents are their communication skills were byproducts of what they were raised in, and there wasn't just a
Of
lot of
course.
like honest, open dialogue about
Right.
you know, sensitive topics, right?
Hmm.
And I think too that, and again, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but they likely avoided it as well. Um, and maybe there were some feelings that bubbled up inside of them whenever they thought about it specifically or wanted to talk about it, and that might have
Yeah.
prevented them from actually talking about it. Just that survival mode would kick in, and so they'd just avoid it. But
Yeah.
I don't know. That would
Yeah.
be interesting to ask them.
Yeah, it would be. And I mean, I'm not trying to by any means like throw your parents under the bus whatsoever. I'm just really curious about if there had been a conversation or what your thoughts were around why conversation wasn't initiated even when you were older. And when we talked the first time, you mentioned this sort of avoidance throughout your teenage years, and then you mentioned that there was like when you were about 18, you mentioned an uncomfortable or situation that you had with a pilot, and I would really like you to share that story and for us to have a little dialogue about it because I think it's an
Yeah.
interesting situation.
So, you know, this is one of those memories that's stamped in my memory box. And, I'm just thinking now that it kind of happens at a shift where, you're not a teenager anymore, right? And you're an adult.
Mm,
So the story is I was really interested in airplanes and flying planes. Um, I was I lived close to an airport at the time. I had the chance to go on a number of small aircrafts, and a friend of mine knew a pilot at an airline, and
hmm.
she had said, "Would you be interested in trying out a flight simulator?" And I thought, great, this is like one of those once in a lifetime experiences I can test out to see if I'm really interested in flying a plane. Uh, so off we went. And I just remember we were at this, big airline facility, and we were outside going to be introduced to this fellow who was going to take us to the simulator. And, in that moment, I decided I would shake his hand because he had extended his hand out. And when he, well, let's just say like his hand barely brushed my hand, and I remember he jumped back, like both of his feet,
Like
yeah, left the
literally.
ground, and he created a space, at least a couple of feet between us. He was
Mm,
so, I guess, surprised or shocked that, it didn't feel like a regular hand. And, we somehow brushed it off and laughed it off. But in that moment, now I think like, he was probably just as uncomfortable as I was, if not even more. Um,
mm,
so I
yeah.
wonder if he remembers that.
That would be another interesting conversation. Oh my goodness. I wonder if you remember who the pilot is or if you could track him down and ask him about
Oh
it.
goodness. Yeah.
Yeah. So take me through a little bit about like what that felt like in that moment because so your little hand is
Yeah.
your right hand. So you went to shake his hand just like any two people would and he jumped back 2 feet because it didn't feel like a normal hand. What did that feel like to you? What were you experiencing in
Well,
that
I think
moment?
my heart like sunk into my stomach. And
Mhm.
again, just that feeling of not being accepted just exploded, right?
Mm.
Um, Thankfully though, the mutual friend, Lisa was her name, she had such a lively personality that she was able to kind of help both of us kind of navigate that
Mm.
situation and get out of that awkwardness. And the awkwardness didn't last very long. Um, it just
Okay.
it just still surprises me because in my whole life, after shaking so many different hands, uh, that one in particular, like just really stands out. I've never had anybody like visibly react like that. Like some people,
Yeah.
they look down, right? Or they'll pull their arm back a little bit. Um,
Hmm.
but to have had that like knee jerk reaction and to, um, yeah, feel like they needed to create that space, that was just, makes me wonder what had maybe gone on in his life that that's the way he reacted. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I like the fact that you bring up that he was probably feeling just as uncomfortable, if not more uncomfortable than you, because I'm assuming that there was like that, like you said, it was a surprised feeling and it was a straight up reaction that he jumped back. And then I'm sure there was a moment of like, oh my goodness, like this person, their hand is different than mine. And I just jumped back like they were an alien almost. Like I'm sure that there was a lot of like I could just imagine that he was probably feeling extremely embarrassed in that moment.
I can imagine that too. Even if I
Yeah.
think about it now, when I shake people's hands, some people still wonder, oh, did I do anything wrong? Should I have held it like this
Mm,
or like that? Or should I have not offered to
yeah.
shake hands in the first place? So,
Yeah. So yeah, let me ask you this question then, because I mean, we definitely had this conversation or talked about this topic when we first started learning more about each other. How do you want people to approach you? Because you're like, I'm assuming like I've been in the situation before too, where somebody's hand is different than mine, and it is their right hand, and so normally, right, you extend your right hand and shake hands, sort of, if normally, and so it's like in that situation it's kind of like this awkward thing of like, what do I do? And then nobody asks the question of like, how do you want to shake hands or something like that. So I would love for you to tell me, like, how would you like people to do
so
that?
that's great you've asked because no one's ever asked me that question, which is such an easy question to ask, like when you're in the moment.
Right,
But I think
isn't
it's
it?
like, I don't know, maybe people assume they'll never have to shake my hand again. But
Or they're just, or they like, I so I can share it from my point of view. I've been like almost embarrassed that I don't know what to do, and then too shy or unwilling to be uncomfortable
yeah,
asking the question to actually ask it. And then I just avoid that uncomfortable conversation and I just go like, okay, I guess we're just not going to shake hands. And then, but that's
yeah.
worse, right? Like you just completely avoided it. And it almost, if has that happened to you before? And if that has happened to you, like, how does that make you feel?
So, you know, post COVID now, shaking hands is has changed, right? Like, and I remember
Hmm.
during COVID, a little piece of me was like, "Oh, great! I've got this break. I don't have to shake everybody's hands." Um, and so now, I was on this new floor at work, and so I'm meeting new people. And again, I'm trying to always gauge the situation. Like, is this a handshake appropriate time or not? Um,
Hmm.
so you can kind of get away with not shaking hands now. Um, but I'm just trying to lean into it more. And what I've come to discover is the best handshakes are the two-handed handshakes. So again, assuming both of my hands are free and I'm not holding a phone or anything, um, just go in, extend with the right hand, and I use my left hand to wrap around their hand
Hmm.
and kind of hold it there. Right? So there could be this, moment of discomfort. Um, but in my brain, I'm thinking there's some reassurance that this moment is okay. And really, it's amazing. Like the best handshakes are when someone squeezes my little hand, because normally when you shake hands you do apply a little bit of
Hmm.
pressure, but people are like afraid to touch it.
Right.
So when somebody does like squeeze it, it's just like this feeling of acceptance washes over me, and it's great. So yeah.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah, I was going to ask about that as well because I've again been in that situation, not the exact situation, but been in a situation where somebody else's hand is different than mine, and I'm like, do they like? Am I going to hurt it if I give them a normal handshake? Like, how softly do I do it? Like, how do I position my hand? So there's all these questions going through your head, like as a conversation is coming to an end, And so it's kind of this like these questions or these worries are just kind of going through your head. And so sometimes I've been at the end of conversations and I forget like the last 30 seconds of what somebody says because I'm thinking about like how to shake hands properly with this person or what to do. And so I love that we're having this conversation and talking about it. And so you are saying that for you, when somebody like squeezes your hand and applies pressure like a normal handshake, it feels like
Yeah.
acceptance.
And
Yeah.
not everybody is going to be the same by any means.
Hmm.
We are going to be using different terms in our conversation today. And what I've come to learn in this community is like, not everybody has the same mindset around what words should be used, or if we can ask about, an apparent disability or a non-apparent disability. Um, so I think just
Hmm.
if you're coming into the situation from kindness, um, that's your best bet, right? And then you can always ask.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about all of those things running through your head about all those questions as this conversation's trying to wrap up, like that is a moment where you practice consciousness and say, okay,
Mm.
all of these questions that they're taking away from this moment here with that person. And yeah, so just take a deep breath, pause.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would love to hear from your perspective how so if we're in a situation, like let's say that we don't really know each other, like we have a little bit of a relationship,
Yeah.
we're meeting physically in person and we're getting to the end of a conversation and I'm going through and having all these questions of like, oh my goodness, like I have to shake hands with Jacqueline, but I don't know what to do. Like what is the you said approach from kindness, but what do you think is a good way to ask the question of like, hey, Jacqueline, how do I shake your hand? Like, is there's not maybe there's not a right way, but what's a kind way to ask
Just
that
what you said.
question?
Just be like, I'd like to shake
Yeah.
your hand,
Okay.
and then or, what's the best way to shake your hand? Just, yeah,
Perfect.
exactly.
Simple, right?
Natural.
And it's yeah, and it's so interesting. All of these questions that have popped into my head before, I'm sure they've popped into hundreds of other people's heads as well. And it's just like a simple question of like, hey, Jacqueline, I want to shake your hand. I don't know exactly how to do it. So how would you like to do this? That's such a simple thing to do, but sometimes we let that discomfort and that fear completely take over and then we do
Yeah,
nothing. And
yeah.
that's even
So, like,
worse.
and even though I'm talking about this and I'm, describing how I'm shifting and approaching handshakes, there are still times where I'm awkward about it. I was
Yeah.
on a work trip and had done this values moment about living with
Mm.
a disability. And I'd been around these leaders for a couple of days, and then I was saying goodbye to this one leader, and I felt this awkwardness. I didn't want to shake his hand. I felt like we knew each other enough. And he's like, "No, no, Jacqueline, I want to shake your hand." I was like, "Oh, okay, fine." So, but we kind of just laughed about it. So even if there are these like moments of,
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm not sure how to do it or if I should do it," that's okay, because like what I've come to learn through this journey is we're
Mm.
human, we're not going to say the right things.
Absolutely.
And when we bring our authentic selves, like that's when you really connect with others.
Mm, absolutely. That is full of truth. I love what you said there. We are human. We are going to make mistakes. If we come from a place of kindness and respectfulness, it's not the end of the world if we do make a mistake. Like it's going to we can work it out. And when you approach things from your authentic self, that's when you can really connect with others. And absolutely love that statement. Just a couple minutes ago, you mentioned terms that we're going to be using in our talk today. So two of the terms, one is limb difference, and the other one that I'm sure we're going to get into very shortly is diverse abilities. So I'd love for you to tell me why is it important. How did you start using those terms actually, and why is it important to you for to use those terms specifically?
So there's a few pieces to this topic, or these questions that I want to touch on. And the first is limb differences. I only started using that term, I'd say about like 4 years ago when I was doing some
Mm.
research into the community of people like me. And that's when I discovered like limb differences is the generally accepted term for people who might be missing digits or missing a portion of their arm, or same with their feet or their toes or their legs. And
Hmm.
just different groups that I follow, they use the term limb difference. So yeah, that only kind of came once I had started researching and trying to find communities of people who are like me.
Yeah. What did Can I ask? What term, or did you use a term before that? What
No
did you use to
term, just
say?
I had a little hand, finger with a hand with no
Mm,
fingers.
gotcha.
Yep, that's it.
Gotcha. So did when you came across limb difference and you started using it, did that change your perspective at all?
Yes. Yeah. Like it helped me associate with being part of a community. And,
Mm. Hmm.
there's like April is Limb Difference Awareness Month, right? And it's recognized
I
in
did not
Canada
know
and the
that.
US. Um, and so, like, it encompasses, like, I've come to learn that, limb differences, some people are born with them, like myself. And then some people go through an event and then they're left with a limb difference, right? Because of an accident
Right.
or maybe a disease or something health related.
Hmm.
And then, yes, it can affect your upper limbs, your lower limbs, one limb, multiple limbs. And there are people being born, every day with limb differences, and or people, having to um, lose limbs for other reasons as well. Like there's millions of people who are kind
Yeah.
of in this family of having limb differences. So yeah, that's how I kind of think about this limb difference community now.
Yeah. And again, going back to what we talked about earlier, like the sense of belonging and the sense of community and the sense of connection, right? Finding something that we have in common with other people allows us to connect on a deeper level. And so it sounds like when you found limb difference, it allowed you to be like, oh, I'm not alone. There are hundreds or thousands of people just like me that have a limb difference that I can
And
relate to.
now I have a term or a phrase to describe it, right?
Oh,
Well,
tell me.
limb difference, right? Instead of the little hand or
Oh,
a
gotcha.
hand with no fingers.
I thought you meant something else. Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. Now you have, yeah, exactly. Now you have a term to actually describe it. And there, I mean, to me, when you said limb difference for the first time, to me, I was like, oh, like I like that term too, because there's not necessarily a negative connotation to it. It just
Yeah,
is.
yeah. So let's talk about this for a minute. Um,
Yes, absolutely.
I was doing some research around disability etiquette and the
Hmm.
language that we use. And it's interesting because, language shapes so much of our life. Um, but language is slow to change. So
Mm,
when we think back about going to school, we were taught to place like nouns and verbs and adjectives in a certain order. So, for example,
correct.
we were taught that it's like disabled person, but
Mm,
um, the more kind of inclusive approach would be to say person with a disability, and that's like people first language. And
yeah.
so I've come to learn how choosing the right words has impact. Um, so,
Mm,
again, not that there's a right or a wrong, just understanding that there's a diverse array. Um, and that, has taught me to kind of talk about um, disabilities as being apparent or non apparent, right? Instead of visible
okay.
or invisible. It's a little bit more like, yeah, neutral and inclusive. But yeah, it's just so
Yeah.
interesting because the words that we use just really do shape how we show up. Like imagine a kid going to school being reminded every day that they have a disability so that they need to go to this separate classroom. Like instead of, let's invite them into the same places and the same activities as everyone else. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that in that same example, if that kid was told over and over again, you're disabled, you're disabled, you're disabled, like it becomes their
Yeah.
identity, right? And it's part of who they are, but it's not all of who they are, right? So saying person with a disability is different. And you mentioned language, and of course um, through some of the work that we've done together, we know how important language is, and we also talk a lot about how the way that we say something could be interpreted differently by somebody else. And I think that's another reason why a conversation like this between me and you is extremely important, because if we say, "Oh, you're a disabled person," right? I might think that I'm using a term that's not hurtful or that is respectful. But if we actually have this conversation and understand how somebody like you would interpret that, and we actually talk about it, then there's so much more room for understanding and for using terms that like you said, are neutral and inclusive, and that way we can communicate more effectively with each other.
Yeah. It's dialogue and listening takes a lot of effort. Um,
It does,
and
yeah.
I'm just reflecting on like how much more I pay attention to this at work and not at home.
Mm,
Um,
interesting.
so
Tell me a little bit about that.
I think it's well at in my organization, there's a lot of conversation and attention around DE&I, so diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm involved in some employee resource groups, so that's a regular topic that I talk to people about. So we encourage like having conversations. Things aren't always black and white or really clear. Understanding lived experiences, and I find it doesn't happen so much outside of work, with our family and
Hmm.
our friends. And maybe it's because we've just gotten used to each other, or there's not these uh, reasons or goals to kind of take the same approach. I mean, I'm trying to do it more and more for sure. And we'll talk about this later. Like when you become a parent, you have to start thinking, okay, like how do I want to explain this to the kids? Um, but yeah, what do you
Yeah.
think, Adam? Why do
Yeah.
you think I can talk more about it at work than
Well,
at home?
yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think from what I know about you, it's apparent that you have conversations about this with the people that you spend the most time with, right? Like with your friends and your family and your children, and your partner. And so I think when you open that door for dialogue, there's, like I said, room for understanding each other, and room for um, collective effort behind making an inclusive environment. And I think that's really, really important. And I think the more you do it, just like the title of this podcast, the more you do it, the more comfortable you're going to become with it. And I think that at work, sometimes it gets tricky, especially in large organizations, because it's like, oh, how much of my personal life am I supposed to talk
Yeah.
about? Right? Like, what do I share and what do I not share? So, like, is this a work thing or is this not a work thing? And I think that because of that, there might not be as many opportunities created for open dialogue, right, around this type of thing, to start to actually understand the differences between us as human beings. And so when we talked the first time, you mentioned that your organization had an enterprise resource group, or an ERG, and that joining one of those or a couple of those had actually really changed how you're able to interact with others at work. So you want to tell me a little bit about how it was before joining the ERG, and what that actually, like, how that actually changed things for you. Like, what was the ERG and how it changed things for you? I'd love to get into that.
Yeah. So ERG is an employee resource group, and they're quite common in,
Right.
yeah. medium, large organizations. And I mean, the data shows that when employees have a chance to connect with each other, their engagement goes up. So there's like a win-win to it. Employees enjoy their work more, and it reaps rewards for the organization. And
Hmm.
2 years ago, year and a half ago, I was just, on a webinar listening to a company talk or something like that, and I heard about um, what we call is the DAN ERG, and DAN DAN stands for Diverse Abilities Network. And going back to language, like the president at the time, like they were very intentional with naming the group using diverse
Hmm.
abilities as opposed to disabilities. And I just love
Yeah.
it. And whenever I talk to people about it, like takes a little bit of explaining. So like from a social media perspective and like getting your message out there, it takes some extra effort. But I really love the intention behind that title, the Diverse Abilities Network, where
Yeah.
we are a group of employees who either have a diverse ability or are an ally to people with diverse abilities. And our
Oh, I like
vision
that.
is to kind of educate others, reduce stigmas, and just promote
Hmm.
inclusion as much as we can for, yeah,
That's incredible. And I love that there's a space for people with diverse abilities
yeah,
and allies. Like it's for both, because it's just as important to learn about it as an ally as than it is as a person with a diverse ability. Because like if I was working with you in your organization, like I would want to know more. Like I'm a very curious person, so I would want to know more, and I would want to understand more of your perspective so that I could help to create an inclusive environment as well. Because I mean, you are a very valuable part of your team, and so like we want to make each other feel comfortable. We're doing work together, but like we can connect
yeah,
and we can be friends and we can right spend time to get to know each other and understand how we can best work together, right? And that starts with
yeah.
understanding each other.
So an employee resource group has about 10 people in it, and I have a story. We just had
Okay.
an open house a few weeks ago. So an open house is just where all the employee resource groups gather together in a common area, and people are welcome to come and check them out. And there was a fellow representing Dan, and he has a visual impairment. And someone came
Okay.
up to him, and this Dan member just talked about, his diverse ability, and found out that this individual kind of had a similar one as well, and they were a brand new employee. They'd only been with the company for a week.
Wow.
So like right away that was like a golden moment of connection. And this new employee just couldn't believe that um that the company was investing in these communities, and that they
Yeah.
happened to have a conversation with someone who understood exactly where he was coming from as well. So I thought that was pretty
Oh my
special.
goodness, that is thank you for sharing that. That is so special. Oh my goodness, that is so wonderful because I- it's a challenge to fit into a new organization any for anybody, right? And so but having that conversation and understanding that like wow, I'm actually seen and heard in this organization. That is incredible. Like that is absolutely wonderful. I want to ask you, you mentioned a couple minutes ago that the difference between disabilities and diverse abilities. And so I'll ask you this: if the group was called the Disabilities Network, for example, like how would that be interpreted by, or how do you think it would be interpreted either by you or by others versus Diverse Abilities Network?
Good question. I think, I don't know, I think it kind of would go both ways. Maybe it would provide some like clarity or like linear thinking to some people. Um, but I think it
Hmm.
kind of naming it disabilities would keep it in a box. And so I really like the
Yeah.
framing and the openness of diverse abilities. Um, And
Hmm.
just, the definition of disability differs. You know, Canada has a different
Hmm.
definition than the US. It's often tied to
Oh,
certain
interesting.
government acts or kind of
Hmm.
legislated definitions, because there are like tax implications and things like that sometimes. So, and then even companies kind of have their own little definition. And so I don't think, I think we're the disability community and the diverse ability community are on this journey of having, you know, the appropriate definition that people can digest and understand. I'm not sure if it should be really
Hmm.
broad or narrow or be a little bit of both. And what's even more interesting is we're kind of going into this era of kind of social disability activism, which is kind of leaning away from the medically substantiated disabilities and more into like how do we create these environments, right, that are inclusive, and how do we make sure we include and accommodate everybody. And um, so yeah, it's just really interesting because it makes us wonder if we're investing too much into inclusion instead of maybe some of the root causes of disabilities. Oh, I'm on a tangent. I'll end there.
That's a conversation for another time. I feel like I feel like we could talk about that for a couple hours, a couple days, maybe. But let me jump back into the Diverse Abilities Network because one of the things that you mentioned was that it completely changed the way that you showed up at work. Like it changed the way that you engaged at work, and it changed your sense of community. Tell me what happened after you joined the Diverse Abilities Network, and how this changed things for you.
Sure. Yeah, I had been with the organization about 18 months before I'd heard about it. And then when I heard about it, sent an email. Funny enough, the email like didn't get responded to. And then I followed up on another call with somebody, and somebody took the time to connect with me one to one. And I said, "Look, I feel like from what I've heard, from what I've seen, that I'm an ally to this group. I would love to volunteer and participate as much as I can." So I became a member, and within the first kind of monthly team meeting, I could just tell right away that this group of individuals were all kind of gathered together in a safe space to share about their experiences and to kind of educate others and bring awareness around the topic. And it was
Hmm.
just so natural, just really easy and natural from the beginning. And, when I heard others share, um, and I felt that kind of confidence, and I felt that there was space for me to share. And it's just kind of built off of that. And yeah, it's definitely, I'm proof that an employee resource group does, engage employees. And that's really where I think I make the greatest impact at work. So not in my day-to-day role, but with this group.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like that is wonderful. I absolutely like it just brings me so much joy to hear you say that. To say that, you finally found a spot or a place, a space that you could openly talk about this and be vulnerable with other people that you work with, right? And I think that was part of sort of your question earlier, is like, how do we have these conversations at
Yeah.
work, right? And I think it has to be intentional like this. It has to be like a dedicated space for conversation like this, because of course, not only are you just so busy in your day-to-day work, right? You're working together in teams and all this stuff, you're trying to focus on your tasks. Like sometimes it it's like, when do we talk about this, or can we talk about this? So having that space for intentional conversation um, has made all the difference, it seems like. And it just, like I said, it brings me so much joy that you and others are able to share openly. And because, like, when you're able to do that without the fear of judgment, I feel like it allows you to just be your authentic
Hmm.
self.
You
Yeah.
captured it quite eloquently when you talk about creating the space, right, to talk about it. And
Mm,
yeah, and that creating that space needs to happen, at work, at home, outside, in the community.
mm. Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree 100%. Um, Another thing that you told me was after you joined Dan and after you started engaging and showing up differently at work, I think it was about 6 months later, if I remember correctly, that there was an opportunity to submit a story to your diversity, equity, and inclusion team. Tell me a little bit about that because you submitted a story and it's kind of gone a little bit further than that. So tell me a little bit about that.
Sure thing. Yeah, this is kind of part of the inclusion journey that I talk about. And, it's really these little actions that I'm leaning into to be more inclusive. And I'm very fortunate that my organization, because they invest so much in this space, they hired a professional storyteller to work with a group of students. And this individual kind of explained that we all have stories to share. They're not just for Netflix and TED Talks, and that these stories build connection with others. So I thought, okay, I'll sign up for this. And she teaches you a little bit about the science and the art of writing a compelling story and how to engage your audience. And it was through her guidance that I wrote a story about avoiding discomfort with my little hand and how much value there is in leaning into and embracing the discomfort. Um, so I learned through this exercise the importance of using descriptive words, right, to catch the audience and finding that universal message and, leaving them with
Hmm.
a hook. And I presented my story among my peers in a virtual story slam. And it was so inspiring to hear everyone has stories, like, and it just was so
Hmm.
special to be allowed to listen to theirs. Um,
Yeah.
and I had no idea that my story would have the impact it did on others. Um, so much so that they asked if they could record my story or a version of it, and
Hmm.
post a video in something called our human library. And our human library is this repository of individuals who've either volunteered to talk to someone if they have questions about, something that they've navigated, or there are these videos where
Hmm.
people talk about their lived experiences so that they're, accessible anytime. And it's, respectful of the energy and the emotion that it takes to kind
Yeah.
of share these vulnerable stories over and over again. So, yeah, just again, another example of communicating and using language that
Hmm.
resonates with me and also resonates with others as a way to connect. Sound like a broken record now.
Yeah, absolutely. Like a stab at yeah, establishing that common ground and being relatable is so powerful because it says, oh, all right, you know what? Me and this person have something in common. All right, like I'll listen to her story, right? And it's so amazing when we give people a chance to share uh, the the like positive consequences that can happen from that. And it's incredible to hear that it started with an employee resource group, and that because like that's really where it started from what I've heard when you're telling your story is that you started opening up and sharing your story, sharing your perspective, and then it led to this opportunity at a virtual story slam, and so now other people are hearing about your story. And there again is now another door, another opportunity for learning somebody else's perspective, learning their story, learning their experience, and being able to understand each other and connect with each other differently. And I think that is incredibly powerful. So good for you for sharing that. Like, I'm so proud of you for doing that, because I know that that's not an easy thing to do, right? And you had to consciously lean into that discomfort and put in the effort to write the story. I don't know how many times you wrote it or
Yeah.
rewrote it or recorded it or re-recorded it. I know that I've been in that situation before, and sometimes it takes a number of times to get it where you want it. But to be able to share that, I think has it sounds like it's led to so many positive benefits.
It has. Uh, it's yeah, it's amazing the ripple effect. Um,
Mm,
because that video is now posted, and so when other people see it, they message me or reach out. Um, I was invited to co-facilitate a session we call SUFI, which is SUFI, Stand Up for Inclusion. And so these are these like small,
oh,
intimate
nice.
conversations around different topics. And ours was embracing diverse abilities. And, the feedback we heard
Hmm.
was um, just like, it was one of the best kind of sessions that they've attended. And they had learned little things like language and little nuances, and other people were able to share examples about how they've kind of been an ally to people with diverse abilities.
Mm.
So yeah, that's like, touching another, 10 people there. And I'm going to be traveling in a few months presenting my story at a women in operations conference. So there'll be an audience of 60 people, and that'll just be another kind of
That's so
avenue to
exciting.
kind of let just to build those relationships and talk about how, yeah, being different's okay, and being uncomfortable is okay. It's part of
Mm.
life, and what we can do with it, right? How we can transform it. So yeah.
I love that line. Being different is okay, and being uncomfortable is okay. Absolutely. I think that there are times where we push away from that, and I think just like the message that you and I are sharing today is we can lean into that more and more. Like, being different is wonderful, and experiencing the discomfort and pushing through that and asking a person, hey, I want to shake your hand, how do I do that properly, like leaning into that and asking that question and getting on the other side of that discomfort can be such a wonderful experience for all the people that are involved. Where are you going to be speaking?
Oh, it's a conference in Edmonton. So it's at a hotel, I
Oh,
think. Yeah,
nice.
somewhere east of Edmonton.
Okay,
But
cool.
yeah, the organizer, you know, again, has kind of heard my story, and he's also
Hmm.
lining up a podcast at work where two people are going to talk about their uh, diverse abilities, and I'm going to moderate that.
Amazing.
So, what we're noticing is, at least in the workplace, like for these resource groups to be successful, you need both the grassroots support, but you also need executive support.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
we're still trying to find the executives that are willing to lean into this space. Like if we think about it, the statistics say like 20% of the population have some sort of diverse ability. So that's like one in five.
Mm.
Um, so you'd think one of our
Hmm.
executives out of 100 would would be willing to kind of lean into this space. And so this podcast we had,
Yeah,
someone who is a vice president talk a little bit about it. And but yeah, do you have
wonderful.
any tips, Adam? How can we get those C-suite executives to talk about this stuff?
That was a great question. I was going to say, I maybe they'll see this episode, or maybe they'll see one of the episodes that you do on the other podcast, and they'll be like, "Wow, we really need to get behind this." Yeah, what's really interesting? How many people are in the Diverse Abilities Network?
uh, oh,
Do
you
you have
mean
any
like from a
idea?
memberships perspective, like followers?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. In your
Okay, so
organization.
there's like 10 of us that like run it, but we have just under
Hmm.
200 members, which isn't a lot.
That's
Well,
amazing.
yes, look, see, I should be looking at the silver lining. We're an organization though of like 10,000 plus people.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, you got a lot of people there. But now you have 200 people that are connected to your
Yeah,
cause that otherwise would have had no idea about some of these conversations or some of these perspectives. And like that fact is incredible. And so, my brain goes to you've put time and effort into developing the skill of storytelling and you've done it for a story slam. I would say put together a story and send it to your executive team, right?
there you
Because
go.
once they see a story of how this isn't something that's uncommon, it's actually common. There are actually a number of people in your organization that are experiencing this and that are part of it, whether they have diverse abilities or are an ally, right? Like you're basically telling a story about uh, how this diverse abilities network has
Mm.
made a difference, and you're extending your hand to your executive team, asking them to be an ally. See what
I
I
love
did
it.
there?
I love it.
Come on. I think you got to do it now.
I could do something like that for sure. Talking
Right?
about the impact and the value of the employee resource group, and yeah, extending that hand for one of them to join.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Extend that hand and ask them to shake it. There you go.
Oh, that's great.
I like that. I like that. And you can use it. I mean, you can use that exact language in there if you want. I think that would be really really interesting. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Maybe, maybe you just nailed it there. And there needs to be like a compelling story that resonates with their
Mm,
mindset. And I think that compelling story is the employee
mhm.
resource group and the power that it has and the reach
I
that it
think so
has.
too.
Um, and I
Yeah.
love the whole like
100%.
extending the hand, like that play on words. And I will do
Hmm.
something along those lines and I'll get back to you, Adam. Like we've got a Yammer channel that
Yes.
reaches um, reaches everybody who wants to see it. And I think I told you, like, I did a post about my little hand, and I think like
Hmm.
8,000 people saw it. Um, so yeah, if there was a call
Wow.
to action for our
Like those are
executives,
amazing numbers.
yeah.
Yeah, like that's amazing. Like there's 200 people that are connected somehow to this diverse abilities network. There's 8,000 people that have seen that post. There's X amount of people that have seen your story at the virtual story slam. Like you talk about ripple effect, like just one drop here and there, and the other things kind of take care of themselves. So I think you got to initiate that drop by making another story and extending your hand. I think that's a great way to do it.
Well, the timing is good.
Oh,
We have a panel event coming up in the next couple of weeks, so there'll be some momentum and dialogue around our group, and I'll put something together. Yeah, that's
yeah, wonderful. Please keep me updated with how that goes because I am now like you got me so excited now. I'm like because this could have a very positive effect. A lot of benefits could come from this, and the power of stories is just it can't be underestimated. And so I'm extremely excited. Speaking of stories, there are a few more things that I would absolutely love to get to. Um, One of them, so I'm going to just lay out the three things that I want to get to, and you can tell me which order you wanna go in,
sure.
because I would love to talk about how you have started to model for a company called Kello Inclusive, and what that experience was like. Because from what you've told me and the listeners so far is that you grew up being basically ashamed of your little hand and hiding it, and now you are like, I'm a model, I'm putting it out there, like this is me. So I want to understand more about that. And then the other two things are, you mentioned that there are two moments that really really changed things for you in your life, one of them being meeting a little girl with a limb difference a few years back, and also becoming a parent about 5 years ago. So what do you want to tackle first?
Well, let's start with the modeling conversation here, and then we'll go
Sure.
from there. Um, so yeah, just going back to like my inclusion journey and all these like random actions that I'm doing. Another random action I did was I was sitting at an airport one day waiting for a flight. Came across an article on Facebook about an Alberta modeling agency called Kello Inclusive, who represent people with disabilities 100%. And just on a whim, I filled out the form. I heard back from them, met up for coffee with the husband and wife who are kind of co-founders to this, and signed up. So uh, what I've learned in this space is there's huge opportunity. Uh, all sorts of brands and organizations are looking to be more inclusive and to visualize
Mm-hmm.
diverse people. Um, so Kello Inclusive, they're trying to fill that void. Uh, However, it doesn't come without its
Mm-hmm.
challenges in terms of, this demographic does not necessarily experienced in modeling, right, or acting. And so I've had to do a few sessions and learn what it means to put together a slate. Uh, I've had some headshots done. I just wanted to capture kind of this moment in my life. And so I found a kind of a local professional photographer, capture some headshots. And I continue to just kind of put my name out there for gigs, modeling gigs. Uh, However,
Mm-hmm.
nothing has come to fruition yet. And Adam, that's just the name of the game. They've coached us that you just kind of put your name out there
Yeah.
as much as you can. And when everything aligns with them, you know, liking what they see and you aligning with what the opportunity is, you just got to leap at it. But it's a tough world. And I admire those people who can make it work for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So you're essentially you're on their roster, right? You're on their roster. You've got some professional shots done. They're featured on the website, and they are beautiful, by the way. I absolutely love them. When you sent me this the first time that we had met, I was like, this is amazing. Like, these are, first of all, incredible photos. And just the intention behind them, like the cause is wonderful. Absolutely love it. And I was like, this needs to be like on a bill on a like a billboard in Times Square or something for everybody to see,
Oh my
because like
gosh.
it is honestly incredible. The photos are beautiful and the cause is amazing, absolutely amazing. And I think that there needs to be brands hopping all over this to show, to create to create environments that are more inclusive. No, seriously, like it's a big deal. It absolutely is a big deal. And what I want to ask you about that experience is, you said like, oh yeah, I kind of went out on a just took a chance and basically applied for this. What, from all of the things that you've described in your story, there are moments of courageousness and there's moments of being of hiding. And so what was it that contributed to you developing like the sense of courageousness or the sense of confidence to apply to be a model? Because that could be a big deal for a lot of people to do.
I don't know. I think it's just sometimes you just got to do it, right? Like I our actions need to as best represent our what's going on inside our head, our ideas. And
Mm.
I
Hmm.
think, you know, the whole like phrase doesn't hurt to try, or you don't know if you don't know if you don't try. And going back to kind of being called that rolling stone that gathers no moss, I've always kind of just been, in certain situations willing to try something or to put my name into something, and that was one of them. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and then just like to realize that the response was now being part of another community, like just a so like overwhelmingly welcoming and inclusive community, and people with diverse abilities are hungry for this. And this is just another chance to connect, right? To build those connections and be a part of this.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I'm not sure if it's a movement, but like definitely being a part of, diverse abilities being celebrated and thought of at the forefront
Mm.
instead of kind of as a, you know, tail end. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, changing the narrative, it doesn't make you less of a person at all. It doesn't make you any less human. Like it a lot of these things happen outside of your control, and so like we do need to recognize them, we need to support them, and we need to celebrate them. That's why I'm saying that I have a vision of that picture in Times Square, right? We need, and you talk about like brands willing to sort of jump on and support those with diverse abilities. um I came across this story a few years ago of this individual named Chris Nikic. He is the first person with Down syndrome to ever complete an Ironman, and he was also the first athlete with a disability to ever be sponsored by Adidas. And so they have a campaign together called the 321 campaign, because Down syndrome happens with a certain chromosome 321, and or I'm describing that incorrectly, but it happens to do with chromosome 21. And so the number that represents that is 321. And so they are trying to have different events, marathons, half marathons, Ironmans, always include somebody with a diverse ability that is running with bib number 321 to
Oh,
support it. And I think it's amazing. I absolutely
yeah.
love it. And so it's yeah, there's definitely opportunity. People are hungry to be represented and to be seen and heard and
Yeah.
understood, and understand that they belong, that there's a place for them, and that there is a community in which they are accepted. Absolutely. um, Before we move on to the other two things, how did it feel during the photo shoot, and was there any shift in perspective, or was there any like intense feelings when you looked at the photos after they were taken?
Uh, well, that whole experience was like thick with emotions and different thoughts. So not only was I now doing the exact opposite of hiding my head, I was putting it out there in front of a stranger who is a photographer. But then the my company's film crew attended as well to video record pieces of it. So here I was kind of like in
Wow.
front of two people. And
Wow.
but so the positive is that you kind of build this like really natural connection right away, like a really kind of comfort with them. Um, so I did feel like I could be myself. Um,
Hmm.
and what the photographer and I realized though is like we didn't really know what would work until we were trying different poses. You can look online at different examples and try to follow them, but I needed to just kind of find my groove. And he did a really good job of getting my face to light up when I, thought about my kids, for example, or my puppy. But yeah, there was a whole
Yeah.
gamut of like nervousness, awkwardness,
Mm.
joy. Like when I got to see some of the pictures, I was so joyful and just so happy. Couldn't believe it for sure. Like, well, a piece of me was like, yeah, damn, you're that good. But yeah, they really turned out really lovely. And I don't know why I haven't gotten any modeling gigs yet, Adam. Like, do you have a brand that you can send them to or something with your platform?
I'm gonna write my own story. I'm gonna send it to Adidas and be like, "Let's go! Like, let's get on this." Um, and if there are any other brands that come to mind, absolutely, I'm going to let them know about your story, because I think again, representation is so important, and it's a big part of this podcast, and it's a big part of what the mission of this podcast, because it's really all about having conversation from about like with people from that have experienced different things, that have limb differences or different experiences, and having open, honest conversations about it so that anybody can come to this podcast at any time, scroll through the episodes, and there's a good chance that they'll be like, wow, she can do it. I can do it too.
Yeah.
Right. And having you on here is such a privilege. And I'm so honored that you're willing to share your story, because it's so special. And I love that, like the transformation that you've been through, and how committed you are to this mission of your own, and being able to again share this openly and honestly and vulnerably and proudly. I absolutely love that. And yes, I will definitely keep in mind different brands that would potentially uh, ask you to be a model, because that would be so cool. Seriously, it would be incredible. Like, I would be your number one cheerleader, just jumping up and down, like so excited for you to get an opportunity like that. Before we move on, I just want to say that the modeling agency that that you're working for, or that you're on the roster for, is called Kello Inclusive. It's Kello Inclusive. Definitely going to put a link in the description for anybody, if anybody's interested, to check that out. Definitely going to provide a link to Jacqueline's photos as well, because they are beautiful. They're so beautiful. They're so empowering. They're, like I said, the cause is incredible. So I'll definitely put those in the description for anybody that wants to access them. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. And let's move on to the last two kind of things here. So you said that there were two really big moments in your life that changed your perspective and changed how you were approaching life. One of them was meeting a young girl with a limb difference, and one was becoming a parent. So why don't you take me through those two experiences?
Those are big questions. Um, so I guess for the listeners, just to kind of uh, frame it up properly, like I became a mother before I met this young girl. Her name is Elise. But it wasn't until I met Elise that I realized the opportunity at hand with me being a parent.
Mm.
So, um, my husband's from Ontario. I'm from Alberta. I had just had my son was almost a year old, and we were going on a trip to introduce him to the family. So we were flying to Ontario, and this again, kind of the butterfly wing connection. My husband's cousin is a detective, police officer, and his partner um, has a daughter with a limb difference. So we set up a meet and greet dinner on our trip to Ontario. And, I had no idea what to expect. Um, it was Elise's mom who was interested in kind of meeting with me and talking with someone who's kind of lived through having a limb difference. And it was just, like you mentioned, Adam, one of those experiences that leaves a mark on you and it kind of shapes you for, being a
Mm.
better person. And here I met Elise, who I think she was 4, 5 at the time. And it's her left hand is missing a few digits. And it was just so heartwarming to be around her and then to talk with her mom, like, and answer her questions about, what might she expect in school, or how did I navigate school. And this was so like fresh to me and new, because this was really one of those first times where someone wanted to have a conversation with me about it. And I couldn't just get away with
Mm.
saying, I was born like this. My mom didn't do anything wrong. um,
Right.
and yeah, so that moment has really resonated with me about when someone else was really interested in it because they were going through it themselves, and I realized that I could help them and I could be a part of that conversation and that experience, that moment. Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned the fact that you almost like you couldn't escape because you're literally sitting in front of Elise and her mom, and she's asking you, yeah, what's your experience been like? So
Yeah.
like, what was that like emotionally, like before and after, or during and after that experience?
Well, I mean, before was, uncertainty, excitement, a little bit of that awkwardness. But after, again, it was just like that sense of connection, community, just
Hmm.
that whole being different is okay, right? And just also,
Yeah,
we had a chance to just enjoy each other's company. And I mean, we're talking a lot about my hand now in this conversation, of course, but that's just such a small piece of everything else that makes up me. Um,
of course.
that it was nice that we could connect on other things too. And I've since had the chance to see
Hmm.
Elise again just a couple of weeks ago. So it had been almost 4 years since I saw her. And just she is keeping me on my toes with reflecting on it and how I'm living with it and how I can um, be a good role model for her. I was like, hey, can I squeeze your
Hmm.
hand? Do you want to squeeze my hand? Like, what are your favorite activities right now? And um, I was even telling both my kids, I'm like, look, Elisa's little hand looks just like mom's little hand. And then my kids were all playing with Elise and her sister. So that was just lovely to see. Like, that was really special, is just to see my kids being able to
Hmm.
interact now with um, a youngin who looks like their mom. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so special. The fact that they're able to have that experience and you're able to watch them have that experience, and I'm sure it's got to be, there's got to be some emotions stirring up inside you when you're watching your kids play with Elise as if she's a normal person, right? Because she is a normal person. She
Yeah.
just has a limb difference, right? And that's a really incredible moment. Now, you mentioned that when you first met Elise, your son was one. How did meeting Elise and learning from her and learning together, how did that change your perspective as a parent?
Great question. And I don't know exactly when it happened, but all of a sudden I started thinking, okay, like I have Elise as an audience and her mom who wants to hear about this, but I also have my son. And now it's my son and my daughter.
Hmm.
And I didn't want to, avoid it like I had done so in the past. I wanted to kind of break that cycle. Um, and that story that I did has really helped too with engaging in that conversation with my kids. I mean, I probably am hard on myself and wish I talked about it with them more. But sometimes, as a parent, you just get caught up in the day to day, right? Making it through those long days and those short years. Um,
Hmm.
but just all these different experiences of having to articulate an experience or articulate my thoughts or feelings, crafting these stories is just helping me on this journey, right? Show up for my kids. And because I was
Hmm.
like practicing my story in the car and in front of them on the way home. And so now both my kids know that my hand, I love it when they squeeze it. Or now when we're walking, um, they'll want to hold my little hand instead of just my big hand. Um, and they'll talk about like,
Oh, that's so
mom,
cute.
why did you hide your hand? Or like, do you still hide your hand? And like, those are
Mm.
just so like just beautiful organic ways for me to just kind of remind them over and over again how um, yeah, it's okay to talk about this stuff. And it's okay if we want to hide pieces of us, but then let's figure out how we can show them in other areas. And just all this like messiness of life that
Yeah.
is great.
Oh, that is incredible. Those are such precious, such a precious moment that you described, where where your children want to hold your little hand and not just your big hand, and such precious conversation that you've opened the door for. And you used, when I first asked you this question, you used the word opportunity. And I absolutely love that you used that word, because it just shows your perspective on the situation, that it is an opportunity to introduce this topic to your children and to have dialogue with your children. I mean, you've seen it now in your professional career, but this is happening, when you're in your 30s and 40s, not necessarily when your children are young, right? So I think that it's incredible that you're having these conversations now when they're young. And you mentioned the fact that, like, when you were practicing your story, they now understood, oh, mom likes it when people squeeze her hand. And I think that just goes to show that when we have this opportunity to talk to each other, we understand little things that make such a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And those like opportunities can happen just in the smallest little moments, like in the vehicle, right? Driving to day home
Mm-hmm.
or driving to the grocery store. And yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that is incredible. Jacqueline, thank you so much for sharing your entire story and for taking me and the listeners through so much of your experience. Obviously, uh, there's so much to learn from this conversation. But I want to ask you, what's like the number one thing that you've learned, or if you had the opportunity to talk to your 15-year-old self and give them a piece of advice, what kind of advice what would you say to 15-year-old Jacqueline if you could talk to her?
Oh, you didn't prepare me with this one. um,
Not necessarily.
uh, so to my 15-year-old self, there's a few things that I would have said. Um, I think just, you know, celebrate celebrate your differences. The little hand is one of them. It's
Mm,
not the only one. Um, and
mm,
celebrate them by having conversations, finding community or creating community around it. Um,
mm,
yeah, uh, yeah, and just like a reminder about the impact we have on others. So just uh, taking our uniqueness and how that can have a positive impact on others, and how there's more to um, when you share, kind of more can be created through that, as opposed to avoiding discomfort or
mm-hmm.
staying quiet or staying um, reserved. And I mean, I'm an introvert at heart, so I know I like to respect that introversion, but still, like knowing that you can find moments or create those moments to connect with others and to share. And yeah,
Yeah, I love that. I love that you mentioned celebrate your differences. Your little hand is one of them, but there are many more.
hmm,
And I love that you said find or create the opportunity for community, because I think that is adding that word create is so important, because there are going to be times where we might not necessarily find a community that's created. We might not have the employee resource group that is created, or we might not have the executive buy-in quite yet, but we have to create it.
yeah,
Right. So Jacqueline, again, thank you so much. This has been such a lovely conversation. It's been such a pleasure to get to learn more about you and your perspective. And I know we did talk a lot about your little hand. Obviously, there's a lot more to you than just that. I know that was a lot of the focus today, but we talked about so much, and it's so important to find community, that sense of belonging. And it's, the language, like you mentioned, does have an impact on how we interact with each other. And so I'm sure that the people that are listening to this have learned something about how to communicate with others that have limb differences or diverse abilities. And for that, I am forever grateful. Thank you so much for being a
Oh,
part of this, and being willing to share your story openly and vulnerably. I appreciate it. And I know that it's going to have that ripple effect and affect at least one other person. So thank you.
well, Adam, thanks so much for those kind words. And I think it's imperative to say, like, thank you for having this platform and creating the space to have real conversations. Um, you have a knack for, being curious about others and listening to them and engaging with them. And, you've definitely served me in terms of, making me feel um, included and welcome. And yeah, I just want to make sure that you get the appropriate kudos for, having these conversations and creating that space for all of us to talk about this uncomfortable stuff. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. That was so sweet. I really, really appreciate that. I am really looking forward to what happens when you write that story and send it off to your leadership team. And I'm also looking forward to the moment that we meet each other in person and I get to squeeze your little hand and embrace you for all of who you are. I'm really looking forward to
Likewise.
that.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thanks,
Thank
Jacqueline.
you so
We'll stay
much.
in touch.
You bet.